Hey, welcome back. We've got another lab. This one is getting started with Google App Engine. In this lab, we're going to take an App Engine app written in Python, backed by Memcache, and deploy it using the Cloud SDK up to App Engine. Then we'll use the Developers Console to take a look at it and see some of the things we can do to manage it. Let's begin. First, let me show you where you can find the lab materials here for this lab. Head over to content.gcptrain.org, log in under the account that you registered for this course with, and choose Google Cloud Platform Fundamentals. On the right-hand side are all of our lab docs. If we head down here, we're going to be working with Module 8, getting started with App Engine. And also, the code that you're going to be using here to upload, we're going to get it from GitHub, but if you want to download the code directly from here, you can locally and certainly look at it. And I'll be walking through a little bit of code with you here just to give you a high-level look at what this code is going to be doing. So here's the lab doc. We're going to be exploring Google App Engine using the Guestbook sample application. We're going to be using the Python version of the application, but the Java version is also available in the code download as well as the GitHub repo. Now, this version of the app is going to be backed by Memcache to store entries ephemerally. Remember, Memcache isn't persistent storage. It's purely there as a caching layer to increase performance and help drive down costs. So we're going to be deploying the application up to the App Engine production environment using the Cloud SDK, and then we'll use it and we'll take a look at some of the things we can do to manage it up there using the Developers Console. So I encourage you to try this lab out on your own. It'll take you about 20 to 25 minutes to accomplish. And this lab, if you follow the doc, doesn't really take you through any code, but I do want to just walk through some of the pieces with you just so you can see what an App Engine app looks like from the inside. So the first thing we're going to do is clone the project, and you can do this using Cloud Shell, or you can fire up your CP100-Labs instance, because we're going to need access to that SDK in order to use app config to deploy our application up to App Engine. Once we clone it locally, we're going to deploy the app using app config, and then we'll view the cache data in Memcache, and I'll take you through some other areas inside of the web UI. So I think we're ready. Let's jump into the Developers Console and get started with Google App Engine. So here we are at console.cloud.google.com, the Developers Console. I logged in under the account for this course, and we have the project that we're working with here chosen, CP100. So the first thing the lab doc wants us to do is fire up that Compute Engine Labs instance that we created that we also installed the Cloud SDK on. So again, you can do this, or you can use Cloud Shell. I'm actually going to do both. I'm going to fire this up and then use Cloud Shell to SSH onto it. That way we're only going to be working in one window here rather than multiple windows. And while that's firing up, I'm going to activate Cloud Shell, and scroll down here. We should see when this is ready to go, and we'll just execute a gcloud compute SSH followed by the name of our labs instance here, CP100.labs, and that'll get us right onto that machine with the SDK installed, ready to go. All right, our labs instance is up and running. Let's SSH onto it through Cloud Shell by executing a gcloud compute SSH and pass in the name of our labs instance, CP100-labs. We could also pass in the zone argument here, which you will need to do unless you have it defaulted in your gcloud config. I don't have it defaulted here inside of Cloud Shell, and I'm just going to hit enter and not pass it in, which means it'll prompt me for it. And we can see this instance lives in US East 1B, so I just need to type in 12 here, and boom, we are now right on that instance ready to go. So just remember, if you're running the SDK in your own environment, then you will need to periodically update the SDK. Again, that's a big benefit of running inside of Cloud Shell, is the SDK is always the latest and greatest. But as you can see here, we are on our CP100-Labs instance, so we could certainly run a sudo gcloud components update, and that'll get us the latest and greatest SDK. Now, the first thing we're going to do is download that Git repository. So I'm going to do a git clone. We'll just clone it locally here, and here is the URL here for the Memcache App Engine Python guestbook application. So I'm going to hit enter. That's going to download it and clone it locally. Now if we do an ls, we should have it right there. Now let's switch to that directory as well here. Use a little tab completion, and there it is. We are now in, and if we take a look, these are the files that make up the entire application, and it really boils down to three core files here. Guestbook.py, this is where all of our Python code lives, and it's essentially our server-side code, right? So this is what's going to be handling all of those requests that come in, putting data in Memcache, retrieving data out of Memcache, and then passing those objects using the Jinja templating engine to our index.html, which will then render those objects. So this will be our front end here, our pure HTML. And then we've also got app.yaml, which is our configuration file that app config is going to use to deploy our application up to App Engine. So why don't we deploy this application first? Get it up and running. We'll put some data inside of it. I'll show you some of the things we can do to manage it from the Developers Console, and then we'll look at some code. Now, in order to deploy this application, we're going to be using app config, which is a utility that is included with the Cloud SDK. If you're using an IDE such as IntelliJ or Eclipse for Java or PyCharm for Python, They come with plugins, so you can do all that stuff graphically, and they come with a lot of great features outside of deployment, like debugging your production apps from those IDEs. Now, if you're using an editor that doesn't have an associated GCP plugin, or you're using some obscure editor, or you're a total coding ninja and you don't use IDEs at all, you just stick with text editors, which is what we're going to be doing here, using Sublime, my favorite text editor, then you will absolutely need to use the SDK here, the app-config specifically, to do your deployments. Now, app.config is driven by our app.yaml configuration file. So we need to pass it the path to the directory that contains this file, because it's going to read information out of there in order to know where to put it in GCP and also what version we're deploying to. In fact, let me show you that really quick. Let me bring up Sublime, and here it is, app.yaml. So the first one here, and the important ones here are going to be these first two. Application, this is going to be your project ID. So CP100-Nuggets, in our case, that's my project ID. Yours is probably different because, again, that's unique across the cloud. But you can put this in the file here, or you can override the setting when we execute our app config deploy command, which is what we will do. Also, here's your version right here. This is also important because this is going to determine what version it goes to up in App Engine. So if you have that version already up there, you'll overwrite that version. If we were to change this to 2 and then deploy it and that version didn't exist, it would create that version up there. And then we've got some other configuration points. We've got some handlers here for routing, and then we've got libraries that we reference from our application. So Web App 2 is where all of the requests, the libraries of your HTTP gets and posts, all your HTTP requests go through there, require that library. And then Jinja 2, because again, we're using the Jinja 2 templating engine that will render our objects into HTML on the client side. All right, let's head back to the developers console and do a deployment. So here's our command, appconfig.py. The A switch is for application ID, and this is what's going to allow us to override the application ID that was in app.yaml. So we'll pass in our project ID, and then here is the update command, which is what does the deployment. Again, if you already have that version up there in App Engine, it'll overwrite it. If not, it will create that new version. Then we need to pass in the path to app.yaml, which lives inside of the current directory, so we can just reference that with a dot. And then we're also going to say no auth local web server. That way we do everything, all of our authentication through the command line. All right, so I'm going to hit enter. That's going to send it up there. Before it sends it up there, actually, we need to authenticate. So I'm just going to go ahead and go through this process here, fire up a new browser, copy that in there. This is going to give us an authentication code once we log in under our account. Here we go. Go through the OAuth 2 process here. We want App Engine to have access to our data in Google Cloud on behalf of our user, CP100.Nuggets. Everything here looks good. Let's go ahead and hit allow. We're going to take this authentication code here, authorization code, and paste it right there. Hit enter, and now it's going to go through the deployment process. It's sending it all up there to App Engine as we speak, and as soon as it's done, our application will be live on the internet. And while that's going on here, let's head into App Engine. Again, I already have this pinned from a previous demo, but just to show you where it is, it's under Compute. Here's App Engine. Could have also clicked right there to take us there. And look at that, it's done deploying and it's already live and ready to go. So we can just take a look at the dashboard here. We can see we have one version. We haven't had any traffic to this yet. In fact, let me minimize Cloud Shell here. We have no traffic yet. No requests have been served. So we have no instances up and running that host our application. And there's some other information down there around building, current load, server errors, so on and so forth. But if we head over to versions, we can see it right here. And all these versions are clickable. It'll take you right to the application. I don't know if you noticed over here on the right-hand side, but there is the link in the form of application ID or project ID .appspot.com. Let's click on it. That's going to take us right there. And look at that. Our application is live on the internet. So anybody could hit this URL from wherever they may be and sign my guest book. Cool, right? All right, let's add some data in here. How about hello world? Submit. We'll get a bunch in here. Yar. Why not? Let's talk like a pirate for no good reason. And how about GAE rocks? Cool. We've got data. And again, that data is living right now in Memcache. But what that should have done, if we head back to our dashboard, and let's just get a quick reload here, we should see some requests on here. We should see this graph start filling up with some lines to show us that we've got activity on our application. Oh, not yet. It'll take a couple of seconds to update, but eventually it will. But look at this right here. Total instances, 1. We've got an instance supporting our application. So here's the really cool thing, and this is what the whole automatic scalability is all about, is if my application was suddenly super viral, hundreds of people, thousands of people started hitting it, we would see more instances spin up to support the application. Pretty nice, huh? And then we can view logs on these specific instances as well as manage them and shut them down. All right, so I let this run for a little bit because I really wanted to show you what this timeline looked like, and also to get some spicy spiky traffic patterns in here. So what I did was let it run for about 20 minutes. Every about 5 minutes, I came in and reloaded 5 or 6 or 7 times. We've got a total of 27 requests that have now hit our application. And let me add a few more in here. Why not? Let's go here, Control R, Control R, Control R. But while those metrics are being gathered, we've got 27. If we head down to Memcache, we should have about 2 less. Right? Okay, now 28, which means I just hit it 3 more times. So really we're at 30. And that adds up because the very first request, it spun up the instance and it didn't hit Memcache. And the very second request, when we added data into there, those 3 records, it went and got them and put them into Memcache. So 2 hits were outside of Memcache, the other 28 were. So we have a total of 30 hits now on this instance. In fact, we should see that. Yeah, there you go. Look at that, 30. Now, you want to see something really cool? We can actually see the details of all of these requests. This is what this view link over here under logs does. It'll take us over to cloud logging, and this is awesome because it consolidates all the logs across many of the products here. So we can drop this down and choose APIs, App Engine, BigQuery, Compute Engine, but we're going to choose App Engine default module version 1, which is the default version. The default version is always the version that's serving on your main URL there. But we're going to look at the request log, and watch this. If we scroll up, look at the very first request. It has a little information icon there. If we drop this down, it's going to let us know this request caused a new process. In other words, it needed to start that instance, put our application on it, fire up the code to serve the request. So the first request is always known as a loading request, and it takes a little longer, and you can verify that because look at that, it took 374 milliseconds, while a lot of these other requests took very little time in comparison. Now let's head back to App Engine and let's take a look at Memcache. We've got a nice Memcache viewer inside of here, as well as some good metrics here. We can see our hit ratio, total number of items in cache, total size of the cache, but we can find a key. And this is actually going to be a Python string, and our key name is going to be entries. And I'll show you that as well when we look in the code here. Let's hit find. And here it is. Here's our key. So if we click on that, we can actually view the cache. And here it is. There are all 3 of our entries. Hello world, yar, and GAE rocks. So it's one big greetings object that we're storing in Memcache, and then 3 entries within. All right, now let's do one more deployment, and then we'll look at some code. So I lost my Cloud Shell session there when I reloaded that page. So let's get this back and SSH it back onto our labs instance. gcloud compute SSH cp100-labs. This time I'll pass in the zone, which is US East 1B. All right, now we're on. Now let me change directories back to our application. And what I first want to do, let me just cat out our app.yaml file. Because what I did is I went into the VI editor and changed these. But the only thing I changed in our YAML file is right here. I updated our version to 2. Let me do the same thing here, only for our index.html file, because the only change I made in there was I changed the title of this page so we could see the difference here. I added a V2 with a lot of excitement behind it. All right, so now we're ready to do another deployment. So let's run another deploy command. Same one as before. This time we'll leave out the no-auth web server because our labs instance wasn't shut down, just our Cloud Shell session was. So that instance is still running, it's still authenticated, everything is just fine. So we'll run app-config.py, pass in our project ID, our app.yaml lives in this directory, so we're good to go. Let's hit enter. That's going to do a deployment right there for version 2. There we go. Now once that's done, which it really shouldn't take long, it's a pretty small application, not a lot to it, we can head up to versions and we should now see that we have 2 versions. Look at that, 1 and 2, and 1 is still our default. So if we visited our default URL here, cp100-nuggets.appspot.com, it'll take us to our original page here, just simple guestbook. But here's what's really cool. These all have their own URLs. So by clicking on this, it's actually going to put a 2 in front of it, 2-projectid.projectid.appspot.com, and now we're on our different version. Look at that. So now we can visit specific versions through, again, that versioning URL, or we can go to our default version here. We can actually switch default versions as well. We can put a checkbox next to our version and hit make default, and then all of our traffic will get served on the primary URL to this version. And that's what's cool here about traffic splitting. We can enable this, and we can send specific percentages of traffic across our versions, which is great for testing a lot of different things, but A/B testing specifically. And once you're comfortable, then you can send all traffic to the latest and greatest version. Let me show you something else that's pretty handy here. If we head back to the dashboard, notice that we're looking at these metrics for a specific version. Yeah, you can choose what version you want these metrics and these charts to apply to, and you can also say, I want to see everything across all versions. You can do that as well. Notice that we have 2 instances running now, an instance that is hosting each version of our application. Let's finish up with a quick peek at the code that's powering this guestbook application. So we've got our index.html, this is the client side, and then we'll look at the server side, which is our Python code. Let's go over the relevant pieces of our client side. And it's all about driving whatever the user does in the front end to specific code in the back end. For example, here is our first form. Our first form contains a text area as well as a submit button. And we can see that right here. There's the text area, there's the submit button. So the user is going to come in, they're going to type in an entry, and they're going to click submit. And what dictates where this goes in our server side is the action as well as the method. So right now the action is blank. That means it's going to get routed to the root of our application. And our method is post, so it's going to get routed to the post definition within that specific class that we set up the mappings for. And I'll show you that in a second. The other form we have down here is our submit button for clearing everything out of Memcache. And notice this has a post method as well with an action of clear. So this is going to get routed to the clear URL within the backend. And we'll splice that and send that to that specific code to handle that post method on that class. And then finally, all the gets. We've got this is going to get routed to the get of our page and also the root. So what it's going to do is the back end is going to pass this entries object up to the front end, and it's just going to loop through all those entries and render them out as HTML, one list for each item. Let's take a peek at the server side and look at some Python code. So we start off here with some import statements to get access to the relevant code modules. And then if we head down here, we're also setting up our Jinja environment. And here's the important stuff right here. So we've got a main page class as well as a clear class. And notice down here is where we set up our routing. So requests that hit this URL will get routed here to this class. Requests that hit the root of our application will get routed to our main page class. And then within here we have definitions for each type of HTTP request. One for a post down here inside of our clear class. That's when they hit that clear button, it'll run right into this post, which is what we have set up for the method there on that form, and it'll run this code which just clears everything out of Memcache. And then we've got a post definition here for the method of post against our main page, and we have a get. So anytime the user requests a page or we redirect ourselves to the page after somebody clicks a button, it's going to run this code, which is going to pull the entries out of Memcache, check to make sure there actually is some. If there isn't, it'll create an empty one, and then it'll pass those greetings as entries up to our client side. And notice that's why we are looping through this entries object here. It'll loop through those one at a time and render them out. Then on our second one here, our post, which is whenever a user creates an entry, it's first going to pull that entry out of that text area, hence a self-request.get on the entry. Notice we have that set up right here. The name of the text area is entry, so it'll pull that information right out of there, store it inside of a greeting variable, and then it will do a memcache.get. So it's going to pull all those greetings out of Memcache. And they're saying if greetings is not none, meaning we have some greetings in Memcache, then we will append that new item into it and then replace everything up in Memcache. If Memcache is empty, then it's just going to store this brand new greeting by itself inside of the greeting objects and do a memcache.set. So that's it. That's all of Memcache right there. We've got a couple of gets, we've got an append and a replace and a set, as well as a delete to delete everything out of there. And that's how the server side looks. And that's all the components that make up the App Engine puzzle. Now, as we get into our storage nuggets, Cloud Data Store, Cloud Storage, and Cloud SQL, we're going to use the same application, just wire them up to a different back end. So it's kind of neat. You're going to get to see this stuff and how they work inside with these different products. Oh, I should also mention, there's no cleanup for this lab, but if you did fire up that labs instance, don't forget to go into Compute Engine and stop it. Which is what I'm doing right now. So I'm going to put a little checkbox there, hit stop to spin that down. Now, your App Engine app you don't have to worry about. That free tier is very, very generous. So unless you somehow get your guestbook application to go viral, you'll be in good shape. In the CBT Lab Nugget, we saw how to get started with Google App Engine. We saw the process for deploying an application using the Cloud SDK. We even saw how to manage it up there in the developer console and a lot of the neat things we can see and do. And we even looked a little bit there inside of the code to see how it all works from the inside. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.